my name is Sandeep. I am working as assistant professor in the Department of Information Technology of MLR Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. So in previous discussion, we discussed about what is the constructor and how the constructors will be helpful in the Python class and Python objects. That main purpose of the constructor is to initialize the objects and also which is useful to initialize the instance variables. And today we are going to discuss these types of constructors and how we are going to delete an object attribute and also how we can delete an object. First we'll see the types of constructors. Constructors can be two types. One is a default constructor and second one here is parameterized constructor. When these default constructor will be useful and when these parameterized constructor will be useful. First of all, a constructor. What is the constructor? As we discussed in previously, that is, a constructor is a special method which is useful to initialize the object as well as which is useful to initialize the instance variables. And in Python, there is the constructor we have to define with the name of double underscore in it double underscore, and we have to pass the self parameter. And these self parameter must and should be the first parameter. If this self parameter is not the first parameter, then we will get what? An positional argument error. That means the positional argument error, which we can say reference error. So that reference error will come whenever that self parameter is not the first argument to this constructor. That is about what? Constructor. And then we have the two types of constructors. Then here is a default constructor and parameterized constructor. First of all, before going to know what is the default constructor, we will know when we have to use the default constructor. Means whenever the programmer or the developer does not include the constructor in Python class, then the default constructor will be included by the Python virtual machine. Right? So whenever the programmer or developer does not include the default constructor, so that does not create the constructor, then the default constructor will be included by the Python virtual machine. Here now, a default constructor does not take any parameters other than the self parameter. Generally, in whenever we are going to define the constructor, the self constructor is the self parameter is the first argument. Then we can pass some arguments. But that default constructor does not take any parameters other than the self parameter. And this self parameter represents the current class object. This self parameter represents the current class object. Now see here, it initializes the object with default attribute values. This is the default attribute values. Okay. That means what is the default values? Means whenever you are defining the constructor, at the time of defining the constructor, whatever you are going to assign the values to the instance variables, that values is called default values, right? Or we can say default attribute values. So that's why it initializes the object with default values. For example, here see, in this one, this is the class name here is car, and this is the constructor double underscore in it double underscore, and we pass one parameter, that is self parameter. If you observe here, we did not pass any parameters to this constructor other than the self parameter. That's why we can say this is what? Default constructor. And here to initialize or to declare the instance variables, yes, we have to use the self keyword or self variable within the constructor. By using the self variable, we can define the instance variable, we can declare the instance variables. And that's like that one here, make, model, year. All these three variables are instance variables and we are assigned that values, right? After then, here this is the object creation statement, right? And then by using that object, we are calling that attributes, that is make, model, year. Anyway, so this is the default constructor. Now we'll see an example right? So class test def underscore init underscore, and then we are going to pass the parameter self. Now self dot a equals to 10, self dot b equals to 20, self dot c equals to 30. So this is the parameter, so this is the instance variables. Now I am going to create an object. So this is the object. What is the object name here is t. Now by using that object we can call that instance variables which is defined in the default constructor, or which is declared in the default constructor. So this is the best example. Sir, when this default constructor will be execute means whenever an object is created. Whenever an object is created, by default that constructor will be invoked. That means the programmer no need explicitly called that constructor. At the time of object creation, the default constructor, or not only the default constructor, any constructor will be executed, right? So now we'll see the output of this program. How can we run this Python files means Python space, what is the file name, sample.py, right? So 10, 20, 30. So this is what about the default constructor, right? Next we had the next type of constructor, that is parameterized constructor. So a parameterized constructor accepts arguments, that means other than the self parameter or other than the self argument, that constructor will be accept what more parameters. For example, double underscore init double underscore self, then we can pass parameters like this one. That means other than the self parameter, if that constructor contains some more arguments, then that constructor is called parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor. And for now, for these parameters, when we are going to pass the values to these parameters means at the time of object creation. Okay, at the time of object creation. If you observe here that example, here the class name is car, and if you see here, this is the constructor, and this constructor having the parameters. What are that one? That is other than the self parameter, there are three parameters we pass. There are how many parameters we pass? Three parameters we pass, and these three parameters we are going to assign using that instance variables. And for these parameters we are going to pass the values at the time of object creation. For these parameters we are going to pass the values at the time of object creation, and then we are going to print the values in the variables using the object, or by using object we are going to call the instance variables which was defined in the parameterized constructor, right? Let me through an example. See, class test. Now def double underscore init double underscore self a comma b comma c. So how many parameters I passed other than the self argument? Three arguments, that is a, b, c. Now self dot a, this is what instance variable, and to this instance variable I am going to assign the value, that is a, right? Next self dot b equals to b. Okay, self dot b equals to b. Next self dot c equals to c. Okay, self dot c equals to c. That c value here which from constructor arguments, right? Now I am going to create the object. So at the time of object creation, now we have to pass the values to these arguments. So for example 10 comma 20 comma 30, 10 comma 20 comma 30. Now by using object we are going to call that values or that instance variables, right? Now see, right? So here the what is that error? Syntax error. Why? Because of here the semicolon, sorry, that colon is missed, right? Now once again I will run this program, right? 10, 20, 30. So this is the what? Parameterized constructor. So what is this parameterized constructor? Means other than the self parameter, if the programmer was passing the arguments into the constructor, then constructor is called parameterized constructor, right? So that is the thing. If anybody asks what is the differences between the default constructor and the parameterized constructor, means that the constructor which don't have the arguments other than the self argument or other than the self parameter, then that is called default constructor. And the constructor which accepts the more arguments other than the self parameter, then that is called parameterized constructor. This is the differences between the parameterized constructor and a default constructor. When the constructors will be execute, means at the time of object creation, automatically that constructors will be execute. And here the self variable. What is this self variable? Here the self variable represents what? The current class object. That means at the time of object creation, the current class object identity value, unique identity value will be assigned to this self variable at the time of object creation, or at the time of at runtime. We can say at runtime the self variable will be assigned by the value of object unique identity value, object unique identity value. So that value will be assigned to the self variable at which time? At runtime. So this is one of the important statement, right? Next, if you see here, by using parameterized constructor, here we are going to calculate a symbol, that is area of circle, right? So that area of circle, we can say that formula is pi r square, and we can consider that pi value here is 3.14. Anyway, here we define the constructor and we pass the parameters into these constructor other than the self variable. That means we pass one parameter or one argument other than the self variable. So now this constructor is called what? Default constructor or parameterized constructor? Parameterized constructor. And then by using that, this is the instance method. Anyway, we are going to discuss about the types of methods, but here just consider this is what? Instance method. And in this instance method, what we are going to result is 3.14 into next r means radius. Okay, by using self variable we are calling that radius, and r square, that is this is the exponential operator. This is what? Exponential operator. Exponential means power of, right? And then we are going to print that result. By creating an object of this class, we are going to access what? That area method, right? Now we'll see. So class test def underscore init def, so self and then r. Okay, now self dot r equals to r, right? Now see def area method, and this is what we have to pass the self, because of this is the instance method. Now I'm going to define an instance variable. That variable name is a, because of we have to define the instance variables within the class using the self variable, right? So this point also we'll discuss. So self dot a equals to 3.14 into, right? So pi r square, r exponential operator 2, r power 2. This is pi r square. Okay, pi r square, and then I'm going to print that result. right? Now going to create an object. Next, I'm going to call that area. But at the time of object creation, we have to pass the value to this argument. It is our responsibility. Now I save this program. That means now 3.14 into r is what? 5. 5 power 2. That is 5 square, right? Now we'll see the output. Right. See what we get. What? See, that is a name error. What is that one here? Name error. Why we are getting? Because of this is what? Instance variable. So we have to call that instance variable using self variable or using self parameter only. Right. Now once again I will run this program. Now we'll get the output, that is 78.5. So this is the area of circle. In this way we can calculate using the default parameterized constructor. Next, how can we delete the object properties? How can we delete the object properties? Yes, we can even delete the properties which we can say attributes and which we can say that variables of an object with the help of del keyword. With the help of del keyword, right? So by using the del keyword, we can delete that object properties, right? Now see here, we define that that is a equals a variable. That variable is the static variable, right? So a equals to 10. Now t equals to, by using that object, first I call and I print that value. After deleting that attribute or that object property, what is the object property here? First of all, what is the object? T. And what is the property? A, right? So that property we are going to delete, right? After then I am going to check whether the that property is or that attribute is deleted or not. So let me through an example, right? So class test. Now first a equals to 10. Okay, a equals to 10. Now what will be happen? First I am going to create an object, right? I am going to create an object. But here see, if you observe, we did not create any constructors and any object, because of it is just for sake of example how we can delete the object attributes. Now okay, object is created. Print, and I am going to print the value of that object. Now let me run this program. We'll get what? 10. But whenever I am going to delete that object attribute by using del keyword, now I will check what will be output will get. Okay, now I save this program and running this program. See now what we are getting? Attribute error. Why? Because of here we delete that object attribute. After deleting that object attribute, what we are if you try to access that attribute value, then we'll get what? Has no attribute. For the test object, whatever the object is there, for that object has no attribute, that A. So in this way we can delete the object attribute. Next, how can we delete an object in Python? The same thing, we can also delete an object by using del keyword. By using the del keyword, right? Now see, let me an example. Class test def double underscore, sorry, no need that constructor a equals to 10. Now print t dot a. That means we are going to print that instance variable value, right? So now we'll get value 10. But if I'm going to delete the object and then through that object I'm going to try to access, right? Print t dot a. Now see what? Test object has no attribute a. Okay, test object has no attribute a. Because why? We deleted that object. So whenever we delete that object, then how that attribute will belongs to that object? So that's why here we get what? That test object has no attribute a. So this is about what? Deleting an object and deleting an object attributes, right? So finally, once we declare that objects, yes, we can also modify their properties and values, right? Next, we can also delete object properties using del keyword. Next, we can also delete objects directly using the del keyword. So this is the important points regarding these topic, right? So next class we discuss about what? That variables, right? Thank you.